Hello and welcome to The Last Word on Spurs. We are your multi-award winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast. Yes, don't scratch your eyes. Unbelievable things do happen. We are on time. If it was the very, very first time, you can find us on iTunes. We're on Spotify. We're across all major audio platforms. We're, of course, on X. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. And we're on Blue Sky too. Look, back alongside me, it's a marathon shift this man is putting next to me. I'm going to have every more across the summer and into next season. We're just getting used to this familiar face that you'll be seeing on your screen a lot. I've got the wonderful Jim at Oh So Spurs. Please go and check Oh So Spurs out. Great podcast, niche podcast, doing great things. Jim, those of you back alongside me, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Yeah, the sun is shining again. Went out for a nice ride this evening. Cleared my head and looking forward to spending my evening talking about Spurs. Nothing else I'd rather do.
Jim, you are superb. We love you very much. No comments are pouring how much that people are loving you on this show. Look, returning, one thing I'm always told, I told him in the green room, is that whenever we come to an end of season or we come to the January window, I'm always told, right, go and get this man back because I love his insights on Tottenham. I'm not sure that's what they've done to him throughout the years or what we're doing to keep bringing him back here. I think we're 8 years into a solid long-term relationship with this man. We're joined by the wonderful, Chief Sports Writer for Sun Sport, author, of course, of that wonderful book, It Never Ever Ages, Glory Years, of course, of White Hart Lane. The wonderful Martin Lipton is back on our screens. Martin, lovely to have you here. How are you?
I'm okay. It's Father's Day and I've been to the pub with my family for a burger and a beer, which is fine and dandy. Just watching a bit of the end of the Grand Prix and ready to talk Tottenham. So let's do it.
Amazing, superb. And I just at the top of the show, many happy Father's Day to all the brilliant dads out there that are balancing their time around Tottenham, around football, family and life. We know who you are. Keep on doing your wonderful job. And look, there's going to be a bit of everything on this show. I'll give you a quick roundup of where we are in terms of the daily news we've heard from Tottenham from a transfer perspective. We'll be taking you back slightly over the course of the last year or so because mine hasn't been here. So we'll get Martin's thoughts on Tottenham Hotspur, parting ways with Postecoglou, and of course, the arrival of Thomas Frank, who will be hearing, I'm sure, his first words as Spurs boss in a matter of hours for our listeners that are on audio. So look, it's going to be a great show. It always is with the wonderful Martin Lipton as well. Jim will be helping me navigate and steer this show accordingly. But I'm going to bring you, if we can, up to date with the latest news that has taken place in this last 24 hours at Tottenham, because it's fair to say it's a constantly changing world. And every time Martin comes on here, it's a constantly changing manager theme. So at some point, there's got to be a sense of stability. But with Tottenham, you never quite know. What we do know for certain is Mathys Tel is now Tottenham. Tottenham announced a statement on the Sunday saying they are delighted to announce the permanent signing of Mathys Tel from FC Bayern. Mathys joined the club from the Bundesliga side in February on loan until the end of the season with an option to make the move permanent. He made his debut for the club as a substitute against Liverpool in the Carabao Cup before marking his first start with a goal against Aston Villa in the Emirates FA Cup. His first Premier League strike came from the penalty spot in a 3-1 win versus Southampton in April. The versatile forward made 20 appearances for the club last season, scoring 3 goals. He is currently representing France at the 2025 UEFA European Under-21 Championships, along with fellow Spurs teammate Wilson Odobert. We can confirm we've agreed that deal with him that will see him sign a contract that will run until 2031 when his current loan deal ends on the 30th of June. So a 6-year contract for Mathys Tel. And what we are being told, and we'll come on to this a bit later in the show, is that Tel signing permanently with Tottenham apparently will not impact additional signings for the club in terms of wingers. We know the club did obviously depart with Timo Werner, who returned to RB Leipzig, and there are big doubts around the future of Heung-Min, who will be coming on to in this show to understand what is the latest on Sonny, who has been subject of interest from Fenerbahce in the last 24 hours. At the time of this show being recorded, Bryan Mbeumo has been speaking to Sky, in which he accepts there's going to be speculation around his future at the moment. And he commented on Thomas Frank becoming the Spurs head coach, saying he's done so much for me. I'm sure he will do well. We've also heard reports suggesting Manor Solomon wants to try and impress Thomas Frank in pre-season, although Spurs are still expected to look at the market for the player after his value rose following that impressive loan spell at Leeds United. And as I did mention a couple of minutes ago, there has been a number of reports that have come out of Turkey that Jose Mourinho, former Spurs head coach, has personally met with captain Heung-Min Son, who is reportedly open to joining Fenerbahce. A fee has been mooted in the region of 30 million euros. Talks could progress. Final couple of ones we've heard. And Richarlison is once again back on the radar of Everton. Of course, Richarlison, a fan favourite at Goodison. His future will be decided, though, by Thomas Frank in pre-season. And Spurs are thought to be monitoring the situation of Jacob Ramsey. So we'll bring you more as soon as we get it on this last one on Spurs. I was going to open the show, but given that absolute introduction of transfer news, I'm going to throw it to Jim if he doesn't want to open the show. Jim, let me steer the show over to you.
Thanks, Ricky. Yeah, loads going on. I guess, do we start tonight looking a bit, do we use the kind of end of the Ange chapter as the starting point and then kind of move forward into what's ahead of us? You guys
I
do
agree.
that?
You know what,
Yeah.
Jim, on that point, shall we just quickly, I think for the last time we played this out, should we just quickly remind us of Ange's last words to Tottenham fans at the parade? And as we come up on the back of that, it just only feels right for the last time we bring it in. Let's remind you, for those out there, what season 3 could have promised. And then we'll come back to Jim, who I'm sure will free through to Martin his thoughts on Ange departing the club.
I told them and they laughed. I told them and they didn't believe. But here we are. And we're here because of this unbelievable group of people, players and staff, absolute heroes, led by the legend, Son Heung-Min. Romero, James Madison, and Guillermo Vicario. All of them heroes, and they did it all for you. Because you deserve it. This club deserves it. And I'll tell you something, I'll leave you with this. All the best television series, season 3 is better than season 2. Thank you.
I've got to keep to a promise. Last time we hear that on Spurs, I know we are moving on to a new era. Let's let Jim just take us back very quickly to the previous era that is ever changing at Tottenham. Jim, I'll hand over to you to formally start us off.
Yeah, it's funny how when you see things for the first time and then you see it in the future with further context, how you start to kind of look at things differently and notice small things. Now when I look at that, I can't help but feel Ange was in the shower brushing his teeth and thought, I've got to kind of do this in a way which puts the people upstairs under a little bit more pressure to give me that opportunity in season 3. But hey, that's all conjecture, really. Martin, I had a question for you, actually. You've been a Spurs fan longer than I have. And I was curious.
Most people.
Well, I'm curious because like my memories of Spurs are more kind of from Martin Jol was kind of the first, like the real, like I'm passionately involved going to games kind of era when I really start going as kind of a season ticket holder and stuff. But Ange is always going to leave us with that, like what was in the mystery box about season 3. And I think there's perfectly good arguments on both sides of the fence on that decision in the end to kind of part ways or not to part ways. But where does your heart and your head lie with it ultimately? And has there ever been a manager before that was moved on where you kind of felt in a similar way about that there was a kind of unfinished chapter that you were interested to see? And I'm kind of interested if there was, did that work out all right with us in the end? Or was it something you look back on and go, oh, we really should have kind of, let that one unfold?
Well, there's been lots of them where you think, oh, what if? I mean, I always felt that with Pochettino, it was right to end it. But if there's a way you could have just given him a sabbatical to the end of the season, that would have done for me rather than kill him off completely. Because I felt that he was just washed out. He was exhausted and wrung dry and he needed a break. And if he'd been able to come back, and I know you can't do that in football, if they could have found a way to sort of keeping him on the books but not be manager until the following August. That's what I'd have done. But I can look back and thinking, David Pleat and the team that he created, and I know that a lot of the players didn't know. They were depending on whether you were a Pleat man or a non-Pleat man, whether the players liked him or not. But the football that team played with the 4-5-1 in 86-7 was incredible and fantastic, and should have won trophies. They were a brilliant side. And likewise, a few years earlier, Keith Bergenshaw went after. Well, we knew he was going, but before the UEFA Cup win in '84. So it's happened before. But with this one, my position hasn't changed from before the final, which was that whatever happened in the final, a change of manager is required. And that is not in any way to diminish Ange Postecoglou's success in winning that trophy. He deserves to be welcomed back forevermore, to be treated as a hero, and rightly so. And he had the presence and the self-belief, which I think in the end helped take the players over the line. I think the way he treated them in the absolute build-up to that game was outstanding, because he's a brilliant people person. There's never been a question of that. But we lost 22 league games last season. That's unacceptable. It's frankly unacceptable. It cannot be Tottenham Hotspur, particularly in this era, with the amount of money the club is worth and the amount of money the club pays in wages, even if it was only, seventh biggest wage payer this season behind Aston Villa. Tottenham cannot be 17th, cannot lose 22 league games, and cannot lose so many points through the manager's intransigence, his unwillingness to recognise that things weren't working, and his sheer desperation, it seems, to be bloody minded. And sometimes you've got to say that it's on you. And we've watched so many games through the season. People say, "Oh well, what did you expect?" And there was no way that Spurs were going to be a genuine challenger last season. In November, we play Ipswich at home, and you win that match, and Tottenham go third. That's in November. That's nearly halfway through the season. So how can you go from a team that's playing a relegation-bound side to go third, finishing 17th, without the manager having to carry the can? And sad as it is, I think it was an inevitable and necessary decision that needed to be taken.
And I kind of feel similar to you in the sense I was staunchly kind of a big supporter of the way Ange culturally supported us and was kind of what we needed in that moment. I felt like he kind of instilled that never die winning kind of culture around the cups, and people will be saying there was no winning culture in the league. Thank you very much. 22 times we showed that, but it did feel like we'd had ample opportunities to win trophies before, right? Haven't we? We've gone out of competitions to FC Mora, Coventry, teams in the relegation zone in Forest, and there's plenty of examples. Palace twice. There's loads of times where you go, Spurs should have done that, and they didn't quite do it. But it did feel like Ange kind of gave us that, and I quite agree that you've got to take emotion out of it at the end, don't you? And you
can't allow 90 minutes. And let's be honest, it was an awful 90 minutes. It's not as if we played great football. We were shocking, just that they were worse. It was the worst final I have ever seen, between the two worst teams I have ever seen in a final, won by the worst goal you will ever see to win a competition. And the emotion was incredible. I mean, the sheer outburst of joy and exultation and everything else, fabulous. And you can get carried away by that, but you mustn't, because you can't allow those 90 minutes and the feelings of that evoked and brought through to hide the previous 10 months, most of which have been awful. We can't pretend otherwise. We've lost, Tottenham lost at home to Ipswich and Leicester. Both relegated. First game of the season, we drew at Leicester. I mean, it's not been good. We managed to. Even Southampton scored against us. I mean, they were the worst team we've ever seen in the Premier League. So many poor performances through the season. So many. And it's easy enough to say, yes, well, they stopped caring about the league because they weren't going to get relegated. But they stopped caring about the league because they weren't going to get relegated because they'd already blown the league away. There is no way that Tottenham should have been finishing outside the top 10, even in a poor season. And yes, there's injuries. Every team has injuries. Every manager has to deal with injuries. So if you get injuries, you don't play a high line on the halfway line with Dragusin and Davis or Gray at centre half. You don't keep inverting the fullbacks when it leaves us horribly exposed out wide. You don't keep on playing with a donut midfield because there's a big hole where there should be a midfielder. All of these things, if I can see it, you can see it, every punter could see it. Why can't the manager see it?
Yeah, it was classic us in the sense it was so many extremes. But I think when you look at the decision we've made subsequently to bring in Frank, would you say he feels the right option? He seems quite a pragmatic character. He's used to working under, should we say, leadership that aren't going to say, everything's infinite. You have whatever you want. They are going to say there are limitations in certain areas with what you've got to work with. Do you feel he's the right guy to kind of, fix some of those errors that held us back so much last year in the league and take us forward?
Brentford's a really interesting club, and along with Brighton, they're the most analytical clubs in the league. They look at the numbers. A lot of their recruitment is based on the stats, on the numbers. They have the number crunchers. I mean, it's interesting, of course, that Matthew Benham and Tony Bloom, who are the respective chairmen, loathe each other because they had a massive falling out 20 odd years ago. But they're both very similar in the way they do things. Now, Spurs have never had that degree of number orientation, as it were, focus on the numbers in their recruitment policies. So it is a different club. The expectations are far, far bigger at Tottenham. Everything he says in a press conference now will be worth more weight. So a Brentford press conference was 12 paragraphs. A Tottenham press conference is going to be 25 paragraphs and a back page lead. It changes the dynamic of everything he says. Now, I think he can deal with that. I first met him at a dinner, LMA dinner, about, 6-7 years ago. We started chatting. It was, he didn't know me from Adam. I didn't really know him. And I came away thinking, this is a smart cookie. I like this bloke. There's something about him. And then I've dealt with him on a few occasions at Brentford, particularly, I did think when I went to see him, the immediate aftermath of even Tony's suspension and the maturity he dealt with that. It wasn't one of those managers where you've got plenty of them say, well, we want to only 2 questions on that. I don't want to talk about it anymore. We've dealt with it. He knew you had to do it in depth. He knew he had to answer all the questions. And he also was really, one of the things I put to him was, there's a problem here because we talk about gambling's bad and it's easy to say it, but look, you're sponsored by Hollywood Bets. My industry is sponsored by bookmakers. We're all hypocrites, aren't we? And he basically agreed, yeah, because he's right. That we all have to take awareness of things out with the easy answers. But what I do like about him is his footballing instincts. He's been asked the Brentford fans what they feel now. They're all mortified that they've lost him because he has created a fantastic bond with the club. They know he fights for them. He is totally all in every minute, every hour, every week, every day, every week, every month, every match. He's all in. That's what you want from your manager. He's also look at the way they've evolved as a team. Look at the way they can change in matches and from game to game. They'll play with a 3, they'll play with a 4, they'll play with a 4-2-3-1, they'll play with a 4-3-3. The fullbacks will bomb on, or the fullbacks will drop it. All of these things, the ability to change, really important. They conceded over the last 2 seasons 11 goals from set pieces. Tottenham conceded 13 from set pieces last season alone. We've seen it. How many times teams have exposed the vulnerability at corners and free kicks? Now, you're going to concede some, but you're not going to concede that many. You're going to have to work on it. And what I think from my dealings with him is that Tottenham have recruited the best managerial option on the market. Now, I wouldn't have been unhappy if they'd gone for Glasner, because I think he's done a great job at Palace. So but Frank for me was the one I really wanted. Look, earlier on in the year, I was thinking that Iraola would be ideal. But then I looked at what happened with Bournemouth and thought, well, he plays the way Ange plays. He's done better with the injuries than Ange did until the injuries started to tell. And remember that Bournemouth played 20 games fewer than Spurs last year. It's easier to handle injuries if you've only got to play a 40-game season, and Tottenham a 60-game season. Next season we know we've got 38 plus 2 plus 8, so a minimum of 48 matches next season. Now, realistically, if they have a half-decent season, that's going to be 62, 63, 64. You've got to be able to deal with that as well. Now, admittedly, Frank's never had that, never done that. But I think he's smart enough and canny enough and intelligent enough to be able to do that. And I think what he will do, the one thing you have to say about Postecoglou is he built a bond between the team and the club that wasn't there. That had been broken beyond belief. And I'm actually going to go on a bit of a digression here. My argument, as I've said before with Conte, was that there was nothing wrong with Conte wanting to leave because his 3 close mates had all died in the space of a couple of months. His head was frazzled, and he didn't want to be there anymore. He would have gone home to Italy. And that was always being sort of denied. And he admitted it this week. That's exactly why, which made him blowing the club up even more unacceptable, because he should have just gone to Daniel and said, come on, can we do a deal here? I can't do this anymore. And he didn't. And he deliberately blew the club up. So and that added to the disconnect, which had been started by the appointment of Nuno, after Jose, as if no one was listening. And Ange changed that and fixed it and definitely made the fans feel part of the club again for the first time since the Pochettino era. With Thomas Frank, I think we're going to be there again in terms of the bond will be made very swiftly. He will say things that will get people on board. He wants to win with the ball. He wants to hurt teams with the ball. He wants to be exciting. He wants to be vibrant, but he doesn't want to give away goals because he knows it doesn't matter how you play. The one thing that matters is the W in the column, and it's about what you need to do to win. Now, he wants to win playing a certain way, but he wants to win. And if that means doing something different, he's willing to do it.
Martin, I've missed you. You know what? You can't help but start getting maybe excited about what the future does hold for Tottenham, because I think, listen, Martin, I'm sure you would have seen a lot of the podcasts, the interviews that Frank has been on that you've met him personally. So even so, you've already got a little bit of an idea as to what the man is like, having obviously had that interaction with him.
Look at his eyes. When he speaks, look at his eyes. His eyes are alive. There's something about him. He's got that personality, slightly manic, you might say. You'll buy into it, no doubt, in my mind.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, look, again, I know I wouldn't say there's been a shift, but I do feel once people have gone away and done their research and listened to respective podcasts, watched respective documentaries, I feel there's now a growing excitement for Frank. And by the time, again, for the listeners that are on the Monday morning commute, Spurs may have already dropped their first interview with Frank. And I totally agree, Martin. I think once you see him with the cockerel on his chest, wearing that new training kit or whatever it's going to be, I think there's going to be a growing excitement as to what he's going to say. Because I think he is ultra ambitious, right? And I think that's the reason why he's here. I think you've kind of answered where I was
waiting for this job for some time.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Tottenham.
Yeah,
it might have been Chelsea. He's been waiting for the chance to take the next step for, I think, 2 or 3 seasons. He's felt ready.
You think he's ready, Martin, to work for what I'm interested to know from you, do you think he's ready to work for a club like Tottenham? Because he's, as you touched upon, leaving quite a comfortable, friendly environment at Brentford where it does feel there's a clear alignment throughout that football club in terms of the way they run the place, what they need, what they have to have in terms of future windows. It feels when you come into Tottenham, you're almost put into a cauldron to some degree where you're having to fight to really get what you need, get what you want. I don't know if you disagree with that. I mean, because of how unstable Tottenham's been.
I would say,
go for it,
is that unlike all of his predecessors for 15 years,
Yep.
He hasn't got to be the one that wins. The club as a result of that night in Bilbao has changed. Demands are still there, expectations are still there, but the frenzy, the desperation has gone. That's been solved by one night in Bilbao, by Son Heung-min lifting that trophy. The landscape has altered. Not the hope, not the desire, not the expectation, but the fear of winning has gone. It changes. It does change the paradigm in that regard. It's a very different landscape to walk into, because he hasn't got to be the one who delivers the trophy, the one who changes everything. He's the one to build on the platform that he inherits. Players who now know you can win a trophy at Tottenham Hotspur. I remember when they signed Aurelio Gomez, and we had a press day at the old training ground, and he came in and, why have you signed for Spurs? And it's like, because I want to win things. And I said, well, why have you signed for Spurs? Come on. I mean, and this was 27, quite a long time ago, 18 years ago. Yeah. And the club didn't win things. If you're joining Tottenham now, you're going to play in the Champions League. You're at the club that's just won the Europa League. The whole thing is different. Doesn't mean he hasn't got a lot of demands on him. That doesn't mean there's no pressure. He's not got a free hit. He can't finish 15th and get to the semi-final of the League Cup. That won't be good enough. But it is a different environment that any manager has walked into for a very long time. Even the last one who came in on the back of a manager being successful took over with them, as Harry will tell you, 2 points after 10 games and in the relegation zone. So all of the positivity that might have come out of Juan de Ramos winning the League Cup, 6 months later, it completely disappeared because we were in a mess again.
Go for it, Jim.
No, go for it, Jim. Go for it.
I was going to say, it does think something I do like about Frank, and you can't really quantify it as a thing, Martin, but Arne Slot had it as well when he said no to us. And that is, some of these managers, in a non-arrogant way, they aren't rushing to jump at the first job at a, inverted commas, I don't really like the term bigger club, but a club that's got more of a large following and to get them that prestige and that bigger transfer budget. Because Frank's had the opportunities to, if he wanted to, flutter his eyebrows towards eyelashes at other clubs, right? But he's always chosen, no, not the right moment for me, and kind of waited for the right time. And he's also decided, knowing what the challenges are at Spurs, that he thinks he can succeed with us. He wouldn't have done this if he didn't truly believe he can succeed. And that it's not arrogance. It's just that confidence and self-belief that I am good enough to do this, and I'm not going to jump to any old job put in front of me, even if it is for a big club. I kind of see that in the modern managers that are doing quite well. Do you kind of sense that with him?
Yeah, I think you need that. I mean, it's not easy. Also, he knows his first choice. He's not like Nuno, who was, seventh choice at best. I see the sixth choice. He's just got the job as Italy manager, rather bizarrely. Gattuso, but there you go. So again, I know from what my dealings with him, I know he feels he's ready. I know he thinks this is the right place, and his philosophy of the game is one that will immediately strike the chord with Tottenham fans. I think that's really important. He isn't, Nuno never did, because Nuno doesn't want to have the ball, and there's nothing wrong with not wanting to have the ball. Mourinho doesn't like to have the ball. Benitez didn't like to have the ball. You can be a really successful coach without the ball, but Tottenham managers need to want the ball. That's part of the DNA of the club. That doesn't mean you have to be ludicrously one-dimensional and wide open at the back, but you want to have the ball. Now, Pochettino's team wanted to have the ball. There were times when they had to dig in, when they relied on the defence, when they relied on Vertonghen and Alderweireld and whoever dropped in, Dyer or Wanyama, or whoever it might be, and on Hugo Lloris to make saves. But game to game, they wanted to have the ball. And likewise, if Spurs are going to Anfield on the first day of the season, for example, we'll know that on Wednesday when the fixtures come out. He's not going to go 4-3-3 over the top, bombing forward, is he? He's going to be sensible and pick a team that he thinks can get a result. And it may not get the result, but that's what you want. But in the main, the ambition will be to get the ball down and hurt teams. Sometimes that'll be sucking them in when they to make them press you to try and get in behind. Other times it'll be a very swift turnover, really quick. Get the ball, play it down the channels. When you've got whoever the wide men will be, if it is Mbeumo and Tel, for example, get them the ball early occasionally. Let them exploit their pace. All of these things. We don't want one-dimensional manager, and that's the thing about Frank, that he isn't. There are many strings to his bow, I think, and arrows in his quiver, and I think that's where we're going to benefit going forward. But also, don't be surprised if it doesn't start bang. You know, we were all suckered into the first 10 games of Postecoglou, which were fantastic. 26 points, best start we've ever had.
Yep.
But then it all fell apart in the space of 90 minutes. And I don't think he ever recovered his authority as a manager from that Chelsea game. Because that match itself, I got what he did. I understood the way he did it. But the next match is when he had to be different. And he wasn't. And then, we lost 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 7 after Chelsea.
Yep.
Because we kept on playing the same way, with players who weren't capable of playing that way. And that's just it. They say that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different outcome. Well, playing with a high line over and over and over again when you haven't got centre halves who can play that way, not the smartest play to me.
Can I ask you, Martin, just to go back to Frank for a second, and Jim will come in afterwards. What it does feel very clear, and you've said it obviously throughout this last half an hour or so, is that Frank has got the ability to change in-game formations. He's very much flexible and adaptable with regards to the players he's going to work with. Do you think the one key thing that has come out of really every manager appointment that we hear about Tottenham is they've got a certain philosophy. They've got a certain way of playing. They stick to their way of playing. They stick to this kind of philosophy. Is the beauty of someone like Thomas Frank that I think we actually heard him at the start of Brentford at the last season, that he wanted to make them a much more attacking force going forward. There's that point on it, number one. But number two, is it a good thing that he's not wedded to just one philosophy? There does feel there's a multitude of adaptability in the way he wants to play football. Yes, he wants the ball, but he's got a number of different ways in how he attributes that.
I think it's imperative that you're willing to change. Even Guardiola doesn't play entirely the same way. You look at the positional changes he makes. He overcomplicates Guardiola, but that's another matter. Other managers get away with it. I mean, Arsenal play the same way every game, and they've been fairly successful, except they haven't actually won anything. Let's just point that out. Liverpool play pretty much the same way this season every game. It's about control. But then again, they had Salah and Gakpo, who are having fantastic seasons. So sometimes you can stick with it, but other times you've got to be ready to change and adapt. And I think that's vital. And look, if you're dominating the game and you're 2-0 up and you're playing away and there's so much confidence going through the players and you've got a solid back line, you don't have to change. But football isn't always going up in one direction. It tends to be that in games, in seasons, in months, you've got to have the ability to recognise that something's got to be slightly different today or now or at half time or even with 20 minutes to go. And you don't want a manager whose substitutes you can read like a book before the game starts. You know exactly who he's going to take off and when he's going to do it.
Yeah, I think with Frank, there is no Frank ball, if that's the terminology people like to use. There's that he will look at the group of Spurs players that he has, and he will build systems based on what he has available. And he will also have his systems he'd like to have if we can provide him with certain players that allow him to build it. But he won't stoically go, I'm going to play this even though I really need a outstanding 6 and I don't have one. If he doesn't have that outstanding 6, he will go, I'm going to get to that when I got one. But for now,
I'll play
let's
a
do
double
this.
pivot. Yeah,
let's play double pivot. Let's do something
what we have to do. But also, look, you're never stronger than you are when you're first appointed. So if he's ever going to get the players he wants, it's going to be over the next 2 months. Now, you may not get every one of them. You may not get every individual you want, but you can certainly ask for a type of player. You know, the scouting departments at every club, even at Tottenham, will know the sort of players that they're looking at, whoever that might be. And you put up a load of pictures there of potential players. And they are not all going to come. It's impossible for that to happen. And look, if you don't get Mbeumo, then maybe it's the boy at Bournemouth instead.
Semenyo.
Yeah. If you don't get if you lose Romero, which is looking likely, you need to have a physical centre half who can also pass a bit. But it isn't as if there's only one Romero. There's other players, and we don't know yet how good Vuskovic, the Croatian boy, is going to be. Albeit, I spoke to a very highly placed person in Croatian football the other week who I trust. He said in Croatia we think he's the new Gvardiol. That's how highly he's rated. Now, I don't know that. He's a child, really. He's still only 18. He's just played 2 years in Belgium, but physically he's quite imposing. I think Bissouma will go. I think Son should go. There are others. I think Richarlison has not been fit enough for me. I wouldn't be devastated for him to go. But if you lose players, then you've got to replace with better. And I think that's really important. The team has got to be improved. The squad has got to be improved because there's a massive gap between Champions League and Europa League in terms of the quality. And Premier League is a hard beast to compete in because there are no, or very few, weak teams in the Premier League these days. I think there's now 14, 15 teams each season who can beat you on their day. And we managed to turn it into 18 last season, but that's another matter. And you've therefore got to have a strength of squad and depth of squad that can cope with Europe Tuesday, Wednesday, Premier League midweek. It's really tough. It is not easy, and therefore, we were clearly weak in terms of depth this year. Injuries didn't help. Not playing a high line, not asking your left-sided centre half to sprint 25 times every half, for example, should mean fewer hamstring injuries. Playing with a lower block, playing with a more controlled defensive system should mean fewer injuries. And that's really important too. That one of the things that also what I would like at Tottenham is for a 4-week injury to actually be a 4-week injury and not a 4-month injury.
Yeah, tell me about it. Yeah.
Because how many players
are
out for ridiculous lengths of time when we're told they're going to be half that or a quarter of that, or even that's just unacceptable.
Mm.
Yes, I agree. Look, I've got to squeeze in our first break of the show for our listeners on audio. Martin, I've got to say, there's so many comments that always come in for you whenever you're on this show. So much love and appreciation for someone that I know has been on the terraces for many, many years. I don't want to age you too much. Like I say, we are going to go for that first break of the show for our listeners on audio. We have got over nearly 6,000 of you that are watching the show live. Thank you so much for all your incredible support for Last One on Spurs. Well, I'm joined by the wonderful Jim over at the Oh So Spurs podcast. Please, like I say, check Jim out and what they're doing over there. Some great stuff around the football finance area, but I know that we're covering a lot more as we do mean to go on throughout the summer. There's loads of stuff going on over there, Jim, isn't there, with regards to lots of different topics and areas, right?
Thanks. Yeah. We're predominantly at the moment during the season close, kind of focusing on the financial side of the club, and a lot of the questions that go in circulation around how can our squad cope with the homegrown quotas, club grown quotas, all that kind of stuff. We've actually built a one place for you to get all that information and actually see the state of the squad in that form, along with all our transfer targets, so you can kind of get a view of the challenge that we have, because it is actually quite complicated being in the Champions League now. Spurs is a situation in the transfer market.
I do agree. Listen, only Tottenham, mate, would be complicated being in the Champions League. We're also joined by the wonderful Martin Lipton back on the show. 8 years in, we've had Martin on here, and like I say, people love hearing his dulcet tones on here for sure. I'm going to throw the show back over to you, Jim, because I know there's a lot of talk about data and how that has been an interesting link up between, of course, we've got obviously Frank and Johan Langer, two guys that know each other quite well. So I'll hand back the show to you. And like I say, guys, keep liking, keep subscribing. Some great content to come on last one on Spurs. Thank you so much for your support. Jim, take it away.
Yeah. Mark, what do you make of the... Well, I kind of put you... Do you feel Spurs are moving to a model whereby they're trying to be less reliant on their head coach? Because we keep hearing about this data model we're moving closer and closer towards. We've obviously employed Johan Langer. We've got Vinay Venkatesham's come in. There's other members... We've seen adverts for Spurs hiring for data scientists and all these kind of newer roles that are popping up. And then we go and hire a manager from a club who are predominantly data-led, in Brentford. But also we've looked at an ex-Brighton manager in De Zerbi who's come from that area as well. Do you think we're trying to shift to those models of the Brentfords and the Brightons rather than trying to be the kind of the person at the big six table with probably the lower amount of law and resources, saying, actually, let's be the best of the bunch in that model and that framework and try disrupt things, the status quo that way? Do you see that, or do you see something differently?
There's no point in building the best stadium and the best training ground when your behind the scenes stuff is antediluvian. You've got to be cutting edge to compete. I think, for example, that Arteta is overly obsessed with data. But that doesn't mean there's not a place for data. I think it's really important. If it helps in recruitment, yeah. I don't think you can say, oh, we had the best XG. That's why we're the best team in Europe because we beat it. If you look at the XG, we beat PSG. Well, look at the score. You lost to them. That sort of argument. Nonsense. But I do think that recruitment and managing the load on players, ensuring that you're looking after them so that they're peak for as many games as you can play them at, rather than overplaying them and risk losing them for 3 months, is absolutely essential for football. And therefore, the whole team, the whole club has to be part of that and has to be able to work together. If you're not united, you're divided. And that's obvious, but it's true. And what we haven't got is a unity for a while, it felt to me. Now, I think that the changes at the boardroom level are indicative of a overall change in approach. Vinay's a smart fellow. I've met him a number of occasions, like him a lot. I think he may become a much more visible part of the club, shall we say, than Daniel ever will. I think that one of the biggest concerns and criticisms made of Daniel Levy is that he doesn't talk to people, he doesn't talk to the fans, he doesn't explain. You get a little paragraph on the end of a statement, or in case of Ange's departure, no paragraph on the end of the statement. And that is a distancing, a sense of disconnect between the supporters and the club. And we've seen the negativity towards Daniel over the last 18 months in particular. And I understand it. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I absolutely understand why people feel that way. But now he's stepping back, I think, in certain ways. He'll still be the bloke who does the deals because he's the one who has to spend the money. But when he needed to get a goalkeeper in last season, he did go and do it on January the 1st. It wasn't as if he waited till the end of the window to bring in Kinski. And you might not look. I think Kinski started really well, and he realised he was behind that lot of shower of rubbish at the back, and his head spun a bit. But I think he's a better goalkeeper than Vicario, and I wouldn't be shocked if he started next season as the first choice. We'll find out. That depends what Frank feels. And the deal for Tel, if he hadn't come back, I wouldn't have been broken. But if you're going to get him for 30 million euros, that's a good deal because clearly that's below market price. And you watch him playing for France under 21s alongside Odobert, and you think, oh, actually, there's something special there potentially. So we don't know yet. any of us exactly how it'll pan out. But I do think what we will get with the changes at at board level is a bit more explanation, information, just putting out there what the view is, because you can't just do a video in-house at the end of the transfer window. You need people to talk. I'm not saying out every week, but you need regular updates for the fans to know what's going on. And I think that is where we will get. You know, Vinay isn't one of those people who hides. Paratici, I don't know what his role will be. It looks like he's going to come back in a role, but Langer and Frank go back many years, so they straight away you have some harmony, you would think, between board and a manager. So these are positives for me that we should be happy about. The issue then, of course, is, you know, can they do better? Can they put it together, show that, you know, words are one thing, deeds are another, and that's the big ask, isn't it? You know, deliver the players, the sort of players the manager wants in this window. Back him in January when he needs changes. Make it clear that whatever happens, we're in his corner. Yep. That's what's important as well. Then what you can't have is negativity seeping up or seeping down from the top, because it immediately, like a plague, it runs through the whole club.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think one of the interesting things has been around the Frank appointment, as you will know, Martin, having covered the club, watched the club, supported the club over the last 30 years or more than that. I'm sure it is. I don't age you too much. I'm being very kind. I'm trying to be as kind as I can.
Only at 30. It's over 50.
I was trying to be kind. One of the massive things around managers, I think, in the most recent times of Tottenham, when they come to the club, is, are they going to get their coaching staff right? I mean, it's been a long-going thing. I think even when you think about, I think Conte wanted around 13, 14 people. Crackers was on the other day telling me, I think half of them were his hairdressers rather than actual coaches at one point. You know, the situation around
You think his hair's real? I just took the float it out there. I'm unconvinced.
I don't know. I mean, if you wanted to bring in 12 hairdressers, maybe not, or maybe they were. I don't know. Nuno, for example, I think we knew he was quite keen on being quite a big coaching staff with him. That wasn't allowed to be the case, but it does feel that with Frank, it appears he's got his trusted lieutenants in his corner with him. And I think, you know, from someone like you that's been around the game for a long, long time, that's seen a number of course, managers come in, not get the people they need in order to work alongside them. How crucial will that be, Martin, with regards to having that staff around? I mean, Justin Cochrane, one of those guys, which you might remember at the time, he was obviously at the club, first started out as a very, very young coach, has gone away, done very, very well in the game, is now highly regarded in the actual way in the market of where he does deploy himself. You know, currently working with the England setup with Thomas Tuchel as well, former Manchester United development coach. You know, they feel they've really gone to the degree here to get Frank the coaching staff he needs. How important will that be for him?
Well, I think it means that straight away you've got joined up thinking. So the players will know from the start that the coaches are an extension of the manager. Now, I think with Postecoglou, because he just brings in a new group of coaches wherever he goes, they were learning the ropes. I'm hearing stuff that, you know, even they didn't really know him, even after 2 years, that he kept himself to himself. Now, Frank will bring with him, you know, a quartet of coaches who are his people. So the messages should be consistent. The approach to the game from all of them, they'll have different roles, but I think you'll have a sense of consistency in messaging, which I think is really important. So yeah, that should be good in that regard. And I think you need that. You need a manager. Every manager needs allies on the training ground and actually in the dressing room. It's why there'll be, I suspect, at least one Brentford player coming in, because then you've got an acolyte in the dressing room to reinforce the message, whoever that might be, whether that be Vissa or a centre half or Damsgaard or Lewis Potter or Mbeumo. I think they'll bring in one from Brentford at least, just to have that voice, because most managers want someone who'll come and be their man. Now, we know that Postecoglou wanted to try and get some of the boys from Celtic and didn't. And I think, but he got off to a great start. It didn't matter. But it's actually when times aren't great, when you lose a couple of games, you need someone who will say, hang on, I know this bloke and it works, and trust in what he's doing, because I've been there and it worked for me and it worked for us and it will work for us now. I think that's quite important.
But it's not just the prevalent staff members, though, is it, Martin? He's gone quite deep into his back room and looked at the sports science department, and he's brought Jurgensen as well from Man United. Yeah. So he's looking at, like you said at the start, like you mentioned set pieces a few times, but those areas where I think it's almost undervalued how important it is just to be strong with your set pieces now in an era where, you know, you can't just go out and buy a 20, 30 goal a season striker. If there's one out there that's, you know, clearly that level, they're not going to go to Tottenham. Liverpool and Man City and Real Madrid will have first refusal on them. So you've got to look at other ways you're going to differentiate, and that is through these superior advantages in the back rooms, right? Do you think these new staff are going to make a difference in those areas as well for us?
Look, I don't know them enough to say yes, but all I know is that he has faith in the people he's brought in, and clearly it's about not just the first 11 or the first team squad. It's about how they play and how they do their jobs. And as we said at the start, set pieces are such an integral part of the game. It's bonkers if you don't do something about it. When it's an obvious point of weakness or obvious point of strength, you know, Arsenal and set pieces, how many goals did they score from them last season? How many points did points did Arsenal get from set pieces? How many did Tottenham lose from set pieces? Now, we got a few goals from them, mainly from Romero or Bentancur headers, actually, but not enough. Given the quality of delivery you get from Porro in particular, and Maddison, and at times Son, Spurs should be scoring more from set pieces as well. And why don't they? Because the movement wasn't enough. Other teams were smarter. We've got to be, if you want to compete, you've got to be as smart, if not smarter, than the best of the rest. You've got to be really good, because it gives you a point of differentiation. If you ally that to a good football players, you've got a chance. And a manager with a system that works. All of these things, it's all interrelated. You can't, the jigsaw puzzle has to fit everywhere. Otherwise, it's just a load of pieces being stuck together with no rhyme nor reason. Last season was a jigsaw puzzle where none of the pieces were from the same puzzle, it seemed to me.
What a way to describe it. Jim, I'll hand back over to you, because I think you said something, Martin, 5 or so minutes ago with regards to maybe bringing somebody in from Brentford that would almost act to the group as a guiding vocal voice if things aren't going well, which is interesting, because that's probably where we'll go next on this interesting point that I'm sure Jim is going to cover.
You'll have to remind me, Ricky, which member of staff we refer to on that one.
Oh, I'm referring to staff. I'm referring to maybe around the fact of obviously the fact that he normally does tend to have slow starts, doesn't he?
Oh, sorry, that's a good point. Yeah, so we've seen it before, though, haven't we? One day Ramos prominently, 2 points in 8 games. But we've also seen the reverse with Ange, where you win your first 2 games. So I think you can look at those kind of examples and say you've got to be careful not to take those first 10 games as gospel to how a manager's going to perform over a tenure, right?
Do you remember in 2014-15 where 10 games in the story was, look, Southampton ahead of Spurs. It's a disaster. Pochettino's rubbish.
Yeah.
He wasn't bad, was he? No. Sometimes things take a bit, one of the things he had to work up, Pochettino, was who were the bad apples in the dressing room. And one of those he decided was the bloke he'd made captain before the season started. So, you have to work it out. It's not that easy. And I think that's something you've got to recognise, that perhaps it won't all be perfect to kick off. But the one thing I would say, he's got long enough now to turn up on the 2nd or 3rd of July, whenever it is they come back for pre-season training, and get into those players and talk to them and foster that sense of unity and make them want to be a team and again, build on. You remember what it was like, that game that you won in Bilbao? Why aren't we trying to do that every week? That sort of messaging.
Yeah.
What did that you showed that unity then for yourselves and for that manager? If you can give me any of that, we are going to have a season to remember. That's the sort of thing you need to be talking about. And that's what I want to do, is to make you the best players you can be.
I guess the challenge, though, Martin, is how do you think we'll react as a fan base if we get off to a slow start? Do you think there will be more understanding based on the lessons and the adversity we've all been through collectively, the highs and the lows? I feel like that in the past, maybe because we've been so drained from, eras that haven't worked out, and those eras consecutively coming one after another, you get to a point where you just don't have the patience you would have for a, should we say, project in inverted commas. But do you feel, if given Frank's history of starting a bit slower at clubs, do you feel he'll have that confidence and support from the club and us fans that we're with him regardless of how those first, 5-10 games go?
Well, only the fans can determine that. But I would say, if you are watching something, you can see what it's about. You can see what the plan is. You can see that some of the obvious shortcomings of the recent past are being addressed. Then you're more likely to go along with it, aren't you? I think, we all saw what was wrong last season. If that's being worked on and improved, then you'll get better results anyhow, and you then can build on that. But yes, there has to be a degree of patience, because it's unlikely that Spurs will win 8 of the first 10 like they did under Postecoglou. And if you remember, even though they won 8 of the first 10, they got knocked out of the League Cup at Fulham in the middle of that. Yeah. And he doesn't care about the cups.
Yeah.
So even when you're doing well, the fans get the raging hump, because that's what football fans do, because they care. And for me, for a lot of people, football is more important than anything else. I genuinely don't think it is. It's really great fun and I love it, but it isn't the be all and end all of my life, because I've got other things to deal with. I've got other problems to handle. But football's an escape from reality for me, and you've got to enjoy it as much as you can. But that doesn't mean you can't be frustrated and angry when it's rubbish, because that's why you're a punter. Yeah.
I think, again, what's interesting, Jim touched on it there, is that when he was at Bromby, he didn't win any of his first 8 games. And at Brentford, he, I think, lost 8 of his first 10. I mean, I know, again, you said yourself that it'll be up to the fans to determine, how patient they'll be. How do you feel the ownership will be? I mean, I don't think it will get off to that bad a start, but, there might be a case where, again, he's changing a certain structure of it being a lot more, making something harder to beat, right? And that's what he's going to work on, you'd imagine, through pre-season.
Look, they're not going to change the manager halfway through the year, are they? Because they let this bloke get to the end of the season when they were 17.
It's Tottenham. But
no, I don't. I think he gets 2 years and at least to see what he can do. And look, if they finish 15th next season, then all bets are off, aren't they? If it's an absolute nightmare from start to finish, then you might have to suggest it's not working. But that sometimes you've got to go through a bit of pain to build something. And the start of the Pochettino area wasn't fantastic, but they managed to finish 5th or 6th that season. And suddenly everything changed because there was a sense of purpose and unity. And again, that's what we require now, is that sense of a holistic club that buys into it from top to bottom. And that includes the supporters.
Agree. Look, we're going to squeeze in our next break of the show. It'll be our final break of the show for our listeners on audio. We have got nearly over 7,500 of you that are watching the show live. Thank you ever so much for all your incredible support for Last One on Spurs. They love you, Martin. The quote coming out, I'm being told, is tells it as it is. Speaking top common sense. Why couldn't we have had Martin on board?
Obviously listening to somebody else then, aren't they? So...
So modest. We're also joined by the brilliant Jim at the Oh So Spurs podcast. Keep liking, keep subscribing, guys. We've got some wonderful content coming our way here on Last One on Spurs. And like I say, we appreciate all your support as we build on the summer. Now, talking about the summer, I said at the very, very top of this show that Mathys Tel is now officially Tottenham. I've seen again a mixed reaction to the Tel becoming Spurs' first signing of the Thomas Frank era. We're led to understand that the Dane did give the green light to the transfer. And Spurs confirmed, of course, on Sunday that the 20-year-old's move from Bayern will become permanent when his loan contract ends on June the 30th. The Frenchman has signed a 6-year deal to seal a transfer that will cost Tottenham 29.8 million. That's 35 million euros, plus a further 4.2 million, and that's 5 million euros in add-ons. They knocked off around 15 million of the original 45 million option to buy the player. From what we're hearing, Frank is reportedly excited by the prospect of working with Tel, whom he believes he can improve. Reportedly, Frank has studied the player himself and felt the move was a good one. I'll ask you, Martin, based on what you've seen from Tel, are you happy he signed permanently? And do you actually believe that Frank would have been given any kind of say-so in approving that signing, in your experience of working around football for 25? Well, I won't put a number on it. You tell me in terms of if you feel approved on it.
I'm sure he'd have been consulted and given a view, and if he felt he couldn't get him in the team, they wouldn't spend the money. What I would say is it's not our money, and we don't really care what they spend, because as you're a punter, you don't give them a monkey's how much it goes. It's not coming out of your pocket, is it? But what I couldn't say he'd been a spectacular success. There were moments I quite liked. I thought he played well away to Frankfurt, for example, and there were some games he played very well. But there were other games in which he disappeared. I mean, he missed a sitter against Brighton on the last day of the season. And the arguments from Munich were that he's a little bit hit and miss and inconsistent. But he's a young boy. He's at 20, you're a child in football terms. The French clearly think he's a real prospect. And I have no problem at all. Let's see how he develops this season. But it's a big season for him because there'll be expectations now, particularly if Son goes, then there's a left-sided spot that he and potentially Mikey Moore will be fighting over. And, that's something that they've got to be willing to. And also, it's probably useful you have 2 or 3 options there because you've got so many games to play. So you need to have people you can rely on and can change games when they come on if they don't start.
You mentioned you're a punter as well. We all are, Martin. If you had to put a punt on where Sonny's going to be in 3 months' time, where'd you put your money? Because the MLS are interested, supposedly. He's got interest from Turkey as well. And obviously I don't think Spurs are going to be chomping at the bit to push him out the door, right? He's still got value in our squad. So there's 3 distinct pathways we could see him go down. Where would you put your money?
The money in Turkey is probably more than you get in MLS, even if as a designated player, because there's only so many budgets, and Turkish salaries for the big 3 clubs are ridiculous. I mean, Osimhen's on 300 grand a week net. That'd be 500 grand a week in UK terms, gross, which not many clubs are going to pay. I also think the football over there, if you play for one of those top 2 or 3 clubs, you're going to win most games without trying too hard. And it was evident to me that as the season went on, he was looking older and older. Now injury was a part of that because he came on in the final and he was barely able to run, was he? It was actually quite embarrassing. I'm so pleased that he was able to lift the trophy because no player who's been at the club deserves it more than him. And it was fantastic that moment he could be at the centre of that moment of sheer joy. But I think that'd be the perfect way for it to end as well. And I think it would be better for all sides were this to be a chance to say goodbye and hopefully have a pre-season game when he can say his goodbyes, because he's been a fantastic player, 5th highest scorer in the history of the club, just has lived and breathed and shed blood for Tottenham Hotspur. He's been fantastic, and for him to leave lifting the trophy is for me the perfect ending, and I would have no problem with that at all. And also for him to be part of the club going forward. He'll obviously, I sure, have an ambassadorial role. You want him to be the figurehead for the club in Asia for the next 10 years, 20 years, because he is the figurehead of the club in Asia. And it will be a sad day, but I think perhaps it might be time. I think it is time to say goodbye.
I think what's interesting is, and you know this, Martin, I think we've done this in the past where sometimes we've kept players beyond how long they should have been here. You know, there's been times where arguably we should have moved players on. I look at someone like Eriksen, for example. I know fans wouldn't have liked it, but I mean, at the time where Eriksen was at his peak, you know, I think we just kept him that little bit too long. There's, again, a number of scenarios we've done that. And I think I agree with you with Son. I just think it'll be really sad, I think, to see, I say a decline in Son. I mean, even like, say, the last season, he's had 23 goal involvements in 46 matches. I mean, we're not saying the guy's completely knackered and finished, but I think it will be a real shame to have to, if we do, witness a massive decline in him.
If he stays, he's going to have to be a bit part player.
Yeah, he won't be starting every week. No, exactly.
So does he want to do that? And I'm not sure he does. He might do, because what he wants to do is to lead Korea into the World Cup next summer. And maybe if he only plays 25 games for Spurs, for example, keeps up his match fitness but doesn't overplay himself, he'll be able to have one last hurrah for Korea at the World Cup, because rightly so, he thinks the two most important things in his life are playing for Tottenham and playing for Korea. Yeah. And arguably playing for Korea is more important, because at Tottenham he's only got Spurs fans wanting him to win. Korea, he's got the entire nation and the pressure and demands that they have put on him over more than a decade. Yeah. So that'll be a factor, I'm sure, as well, in his thinking about how what move will make him be the best he can be at the World Cup next summer. And he's right to think like that. No, there's nothing wrong with him taking that view.
Yep.
This is the other thing, of course, that we're going to have, if they were to sign Mbeumo, it'll be, but he can't play in January. That's not fair, because the club, the African nations, starts, I think, on Christmas, just before Christmas Eve. So we're going to lose any African player for potentially 6 weeks through the winter.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's going to be interesting what they do in terms of the summer. We're going to come on to that as we look to close the show at the end. But one player that I have to ask you about, which every time we bring him up and there's been some form of an interview or some form of communication with Romero, it seems to always be explosive whenever he does either take to social media or does talk overseas. And look, at the moment, he's got 2 years to go on his deal. As I mentioned, he rarely does any form of English media at all whatsoever. He's spoken, obviously, to the Argentinian press recently. He's, of course, put out what felt, me personally, a very specifically timed post. You know, and for those, when I say a specifically timed post, I think it was 56 minutes after Tottenham announced the appointment of Thomas Frank. We had a Romero post that followed, in which he congratulated Postecoglou on winning, of course, the Europa League with Tottenham, and obviously the fact that he was departing the club and wishing him all the very, very best for the future. But there was one line that very much stood out from that post, and I'll just read that to you, where he said, "From day one, you paved the way despite the many obstacles that always existed and always will exist." Now, you can interpret that on a number of different ways in what he's referring to. I think we know that he's had issues in regards to the medical department at the club. We know he's been critical of the board and their ambition at Tottenham. I mean, how coincidental is it, Martin, that this post comes under an hour of the new manager being appointed? And I think, just for time purposes, I'll ask you, was that disrespectful to Thomas Frank? And in addition, what future does he have at Tottenham, in your opinion? Is it his way of trying to angle a move out the door?
I think he's looking at what's best for Cristian Romero, and I've got no problem with that, because that's what footballers do, like anybody else would do. When he's fit and when his head's right, he's an outstanding defender. He is world class. How many games does he play each season? That's the question that I think is a legitimate one. Not enough. When he wants to play, he's terrific. How often does he want to play? For me, not enough. Now, if he really wants to play for this manager, and if things are going well, he will really want to play. Then suddenly you start to think, oh, hang on, we don't want to lose him. But if he wants to go, and there's someone knocking on the door offering the sort of money that makes it sensible to sell, then you sell. Now, I wouldn't let him go for less than 55 million. We've got, to use a Trumpism, we've got that, we hold all the cards. 2 years on the contract, and there aren't that many teams who can pay. Even though Spurs get grief for not being big players, there aren't that many teams who can afford to pay the money that Spurs would want or the wages that he's already on at Spurs in the world. There's a finite number of clubs. So look, if Real Madrid come in, he's obviously going to want to go there, and you can see why he might want to go to Atletico to play with Simeone. But if they're going to go out and buy Hincapié, which seems to be the suggestion from Leverkusen, then probably not going to buy 2 centre halves. So where does he go then? He might think, actually, let's just do 1 more year at Spurs, see how it goes, and then they'll have to sell me next summer if I don't sign a new contract, or they'll offer me such a good contract that I don't want to go. And he can use that, and I've got no problem with that. But I do think it may well be, of course, with a different style of play, that he won't be so exposed and he won't get injured as much. But there have been times when I've thought he only really wants to play for Argentina. Spurs might pay his wages, but he actually plays for Argentina and Tottenham when he can be asked. And that just, I think plenty will feel that way. There are other times you think, wow, he is incredible. But he does have this lunatic fringe to him where he'll suddenly go 70 yards for no obvious reason and get a yellow card, which could be a red. What are you doing over there? There's no reason for you to be there. Other times, great. What he did to Maguire in the final was fantastic because he knew exactly what he was doing.
Yeah, he's a winner.
And he wanted to eat up the clock.
Yeah.
By doing nothing, by just consuming time. And that's exactly what he did, because he knew that they were never going to add all of that time on. And it would wind up United and probably get a couple of bookings for United players as well, which adds more time, takes more time out of the game. That's what you want from a player. I mean, you want someone who can be horrible, and when it matters, he can be horrible. But you want your centre halves to be like that. You don't want to be nice guys. They're centre halves. They're supposed to be horrible. I mean, that's just part of it. So, do I want to sell? No. But if you have to do something, if it becomes foolish to hold on for the sake of it when he's going to be, a viper in the nest, then you have to do something about it. But I don't know that, and only the manager and the club can determine that, because I'm not in there. I don't know what he's like.
Yep.
And that'll be for Thomas Frank and everybody else to make that determination. But you've got until September the 1st to do it. And they'll probably know by July the 20th, in truth.
Yeah, and I have said this, and Jim, coming on this point, I mean, his English has improved a lot, hasn't it, in terms of that post? Come on, Jim, come in. I can see your direct opinion on this. What do you think, Jim?
I think that post was sat in his drafts for about 2 or 3 weeks. Well, 2 weeks before he posted it, and it had been worked on with whoever helps him with his PR for sure. But I think there's fun with players. There's some players that you would want in a cup final, but there's some players you'd want over the course of a season. There was a debate going on with who's better, Toby Alderweireld or Cristian Romero? Well, I would take Romero fully fit and firing in a cup final. But if someone said you can have one in a squad for a season, I'd say Toby, because I think he's going to stay fit. He's going to play 40 games. But equally with Romero, if I had to take a punt again about one player in the Premier League who could cause the most disruption if they wanted to leave a club, I would be considering Romero. And I've never seen him cause an issue to kind of amplify that message on, make it something I'm going to kind of staunchly stand by, because I could be proven completely wrong. He could prove just to be the type of person who says, I'm getting on with whoever I'm contracted to. But you would feel, based on how he behaves on the pitch, he's got the ability to force a club's hand and be particularly disruptive if he really passionately believes he should get out. Do you think that's
but also, I'm not going to criticize a player for looking after himself, because we all look after ourselves.
Yeah.
What I don't want him to do is to be, if any individual is so much of aggravation that he actually destabilizes the whole thing, then there's only one solution for harmony reasons, and that's to get rid. But I'm not saying that is the case because I don't know.
Yeah.
And it may be, look, mate, if you're 2 years out from the end of your contract, why wouldn't you just position yourself? Why wouldn't you just to see? If you're not sure what the manager's going to be like, then it would be foolish, and you've got a market out there. Just test the waters. Of course you do. But then suddenly you've 2 weeks into pre-season, you think, oh, I like this bloke. I think we've got something here. And actually, I can probably get another 20 grand a week out of staying here for 3 years on a new contract. And even then I can probably go next summer if I want to. Then you play that game, don't you? Shake the money tree.
Yeah, I think what's so interesting with this situation is that if anyone's done their due diligence on Frank and what they've seen in interviews, he's had this very much clear term of a no dickhead policy. And sorry for that language, but he has used that term of a no dickhead policy. And by saying that, he actually has said that he detests players that come in and don't care for the club, don't care for the staff. And he's got these non-negotiables, and that being the main key one. And like Jim has said, we've seen nothing really to suggest or amplify behind the scenes that he's done anything. But by the timing of certain interviews and certain social media posts, it feels that they are posted for absolute maximum effect in that moment. I mean, damage might be a strong.
Let's put it in those ways.
He's a clever guy.
He knows exactly. He knows exactly what he's doing. I mean, is it coincidental that was, posted 56 minutes after Thomas Frank's appointment? I don't think so. A yes or no, Martin? Will Romero be at Tottenham when the transfer window shuts? Yes or no, in your opinion? I
can't answer. I genuinely don't know. I think it's a coin toss. It's a real coin toss.
Okay.
Look, we'll probably know by the start of August.
Yep.
So that's but that's 2 months away.
Yep.
We'll know then. But I don't think we can tell now. We'll know by what happens once they get back on the training ground.
Yeah.
But that won't be till the back end of July, will it? So I think we've got to be realistic. It's on him.
Yeah. Can I just say one thing? I want to be very clear on this. I love the fact if it's the case, QT absolutely loves the football club and wants the investment. We all want the investment at the club. But all I would suggest is that it does seem very, again, coincidental that every time we approach some form of an international break, we don't know where Romero is or why he can't feature. That's all I would say in the case. But let's see how it plays out. I'm conscious of time, Martin. We've got a lot to go through. So I'm just going to fire some, I think me and Jim will fire some quick fire questions at you and then close on a nice one in terms of maybe expectations for the season. This is going to be quick fire. You already mentioned for you that you would think, in your opinion, or you'd like to think that we might be able to bring a player with us from Brentford who could really, in the camp, almost lay down the message of Frank. And even when times maybe don't go so great, someone has got that knowledge of knowing what Frank is like as a manager. If it was you and you would like to bring one player from Brentford, the likes of Mbeumo, Visser, Collins, Damsgaard, do you have one particular player you would like to see him follow through the door to Tottenham, Frank-wise?
Yeah, and Mbeumo for me, without question. I think he's fantastic. Absolutely terrific. He scares teams rigid. He's so strong. He scores goals. Willing worker. He's a fabulous player. And wherever he goes, he's going to improve that team.
Love that. Jim, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, the other one was Semenyo is another name. But I think just these wingers in general, we all went into this window as fans saying, the six, we need a six, do what the unmentionables down the road did and throw £100 million at one and get one over line. But all the big money seems to be touted towards the wingers. Do you see that as the right move? If you were working within our recruitment team?
Remember this time last year, Frank was absolutely all in on Gray. Wanted him. Gray's best position, I think, and we never saw him play there, will end up being as a holding midfielder, where he's got where his range of passing and mobility will make him a player. Now, I'm not saying that he's ready now, but if you were to play him and Bergvall as a double pivot there, for example, you wouldn't be fearful of them getting caught out, actually, even though they're both very, very young. at the same time, if you can get her out and get an experienced player who can play there at sensible money, you don't have to. There aren't many £100 million players. Arsenal are going to spend 55 on Zubimendi. Not, they half of what they spent on Rice to get a player who the Spaniards think is as good as Rodri in that position. It's about getting the right player, not the right price tag. So you need, if what you haven't got in the squad is good enough and you can't find a way around it, you need to go and find someone who is. But tell me who's the player we're going to go out and Tottenham are going to go out and buy to play in that 6th role. Give me a name.
Listen, if you ask me who I'd like,
if you're involved in recruitment, then brilliant. Then don't tell me because you know. But I don't, and I'm not going to try and pretend I've got these solutions because I don't have them at this stage. It'd be foolish for me to pretend I do.
Yeah, I mean, Adam Walton at Palace is great, but God knows what it cost you to get him out.
Different sort of player, though. I mean, because he's more of an attacking player. What I love about Walton is he takes the ball side on. He's always giving himself a passing angle whenever he gets it. He's terrific when he's fit. And he started the first half of last season. He wasn't fit. He got fit, and he was outstanding towards the end of the season for him. Yeah.
Want to ask you about, if I can, Martin, Eberechi Eze, a continuous link to the club that never really ever appears to be pulled off every single window. We know he's got a release clause in his contract that becomes active this summer. It is worth 68 million. It's 60 million initially, and then a further 8 million in add-ons. I think what we've seen in the past, whenever we've asked journalists that have knowledge of this contractual situation with Eze, is that the issue being is that you have to pay, if not all of the money up front, which is not easy for clubs to have that kind of money on the go. Do you look at Eze and think he's a Tottenham player?
Oh, I think he's terrific. I'd love him. But where does he fit into the squad? When you've got Maddison and Kulusevski already there, you can't have 12 number 10s. It's like, how do you do it? It's easier to get Eze now than it would have been had Glasner been appointed, I suspect, because Palace would have played hardball. Palace are going to sell at least one of their stars, and their two main assets are three main assets are Gay, Wharton, and Eze. So if you want to get one of those, you prioritise the one you want, and you probably have to go in quite quickly. Tottenham couldn't sign anybody where they didn't have a manager. Now they can sign people. In fact, they couldn't sign anyone realistically until tomorrow, when the window, or Monday, when the transfer window opens, because the previous one is really just for Club World Cup teams. So it's still a long way to go. I mean, the official transfer window for the summer actually opens on Monday morning. So moaning about signings that haven't happened, well, do you not think the negotiations are taking place? But they've also got to ensure that the manager, when they didn't know for certain who it was going to be, is on side with them. That any targets that Postecoglou might have been talking about may not fit for Frank. So there needs to be that conversation as well. So I think you've got to give it, let's see what moves are made in the next few weeks. I've seen them linked with a Italian boy from Roma, which obviously would be a Paratici move. Yeah. But I think also the reality is you've got to get people out. You've got to get Bissouma out, and you've got to get Richarlison probably out, and you've got to get two or three others out, because every club has got to. You can't just spend. You've also got to get some money in. This idea, Spurs just go and spend 500 million or whatever. No, it doesn't work like that, and they're not going to spend that anyhow. So, but Spurs' net spend is very high compared to most clubs. But just they bought some rubbish. They spent nearly 60 million on a midfielder who couldn't run.
Yeah.
Yeah. But talking of, not actually, there's one example where we managed to sign a player for a friendly, which I think is the first I've ever seen anyway, Martin, in Manor Solomon. He's got an interesting season ahead. It seems like Frank supposedly is quite keen on him. So I was going to ask you what you thought of retaining Solomon, particularly if Richie goes out. I think there's definitely value in having that extra left winger. And if we loan out Mikey Moore, there's another reason to perhaps bring him in. But also Ben Davies, do you feel that contract extension was more of a, let's make sure we get some money for you, Ben? Or was it, let's keep your experience around the club for another season and you're a valuable part of the squad?
It could be either with Davies, in that I think he's been one of the great servants of the club in his time. And his bond with Son, as we know, is really, really tight. I think he's a future manager quite possibly at Tottenham. And I would not be averse to him being around for that role within the club and moving towards, because he's done his coaching badges, I understand, moving towards that stage of his career. But if someone comes in and makes an offer, he's not going to play much next season. He will then have a choice to make, and the club will have a choice to make. With Solomon, he did well for Leeds. He looked as if he's going to do well in the previous season until he got injured. You know, he played well in that game at Burnley, didn't he? And a few others. And he looked, and then he got injured. And we didn't see him again. It's a bit like when Perisic got injured. He was a really good player, and then got injured, and that was it. We never saw him again. And actually, sometimes a bit of experience might not be a terrible thing, even if it's only not getting panicky in the last 20 minutes of a game. And we ended up bringing in Werner because he had experience. Trouble was, he wasn't good enough. But it's an understandable. It looked like a smart move. You know, there were reasons for doing it. At the end of the previous season, he actually scored 3 or 4 goals and seemed to be doing okay. Then last season, apart from that very early goal against City, he did nothing, did he? He ended up being scared of falling over his own shoelaces. It was embarrassing. So, you know, I don't think I'll be opposed to having a look at Solomon. It doesn't mean we're actually going to end up sticking with him.
Yep.
Let him through it. But if Frank likes what he sees, then he's the manager. You know, the one thing you've got to think about is Tottenham need to have 8 homegrown players in the European squad. And that doesn't include those who are under 21. So otherwise we can have fewer players in the squad. So we've got to think about that. That's why there might be an argument for bringing back, say, Kyle Walker-Peters.
Yeah.
Because he's homegrown.
Yep.
And can play against the teams who are in pots 3 and 4. We're likely to be in pot 3 unless Benfica get knocked out in the playoffs. But you know, things like that might be sensible.
Martin, the interrogation's nearly over. We're on the final couple of questions. I've got to say, it has always been great whenever we have you on, and we always run out of time because you're just brilliant at what you do and talks about Tottenham. I know many people love you for it. Look, when you look at Daniel Levy's track record of managers, I won't need to tell you what his track record is, but the reality is that in all Levy, he's sacked 13 managers, and with the arrival of Frank, it would have meant that he would have had 19 different men leading the team from the dugout. That includes caretaker managers during his 24 years at the club. Do you think he will be given the time by Daniel Levy to take Spurs into season 3, which is something that hasn't been achieved since Pochettino was last at the club?
I do, yes. But then again, it may not be Levy who makes that decision.
Interesting. Okay, we haven't.
Who knows? I mean, I'm not a fortune teller, but I think I believe that Frank will prove to be an outstanding appointment, and will take the club forward, and that in 2 years' time, he will have already signed a new extended contract.
Interesting. I love that. Do you want Hannah to close us off on the final couple of questions?
Yeah, I was going to ask you for your kind of prediction there, and where you kind of not just what I guess what do you think Frank's personal target he'll setting himself? And I think we should turn the last question a bit on Ricky, shouldn't we, as well, Martin, and make him give us his receipts. Let us know where he thinks Frank's gonna finish live on air, don't you?
Look, I think that the aim will be, surprise, getting into the Champions League and winning a cup.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, in fact, what we did this year, but doing it the right way, like finish 5th or 4th and win a cup. That's going to be the aim. Got to be the aim, because I said that the whole landscape has changed now. Spurs winning is what they do. They've won something. It's, you know, you can build on that. There's one club in North London that's under pressure, more pressure to win this year than Tottenham, I promise you. Even though they've been infinitely better than us for 3 years, because they've got to win. Spurs winning a cup and coming top 5 has got to be the design. And there's no reason why not. That's what it's, you know, they finished 5th season before last, despite losing the best striker in the history of the club, arguably, certainly the best goal scorer in the history of the Premier League. I think it would have been intended if I think he'd come back for someone and break that record of Shearer's. And that was despite the problems with a proper manager, proper disciplinary structure within the club. They'd have finished third season before last. And despite all the injuries, they should have easily finished in the top 8 last season.
Yeah.
If the recruitment's right and the manager's right and the attitude is right, there is no reason they should not be aiming for that.
Well, I got battered on Sky, Martin, for saying that Tottenham should be aiming to have at least a top half finish and winning a cup, and I would snap your hand off for that. And the reason why I said that for me is that I don't think it's easy to go from 17th to straight back into the top 4, given the structural changes around the club, given the managerial changes, given the fact you're now trying to imprint a new philosophy on the group.
You're right. It's not easy. I'll just add one word to say that, though. Leicester City.
I know, but you know that Leicester City season, though, we have to also remember a lot of
they went from 17th to top.
I know. And even Forest have gone from 17th to 6th, so it can be done. But I just think, realistic expectations now. I know the thing is now, after having that win of the trophy and having the parade and having an unbelievable week, we want it again. We want it a lot closer than it was 17 years ago. But I think I just try to look at things rational. That I just don't think it's going to be as easy to jump from 17th back into the top 4. So I just think for me, if you offered me a decent top 8 finish with a cup, I think in the first season, I would absolutely bite your hands off for it, because this is a club, again, they lost 22 times last season. He's got to change, the psychological element to the club.
I do not expect Spurs to be in the Champions League every season. I do think they should be in Europe every season.
100% agree. They should be competing. They have to compete. I agree. Jim, do you want to give us your prediction? Do you want to give us your season prediction?
Look, I would, unless it's an absolute car crash and we finish, 15th or 17th, I'm saying we should stick with Frank beyond the first season and give him, that level of support. But my expectations are, it's finishing in the Europa League spots rather than the Champions League spots in this first season. And I don't expect him to win a trophy in the first season, but what I want to see is him taking at least one other cup seriously. So often we've seen us go out of cups because the prioritization has been so heavy on something else. I'd like there to be a plan, like Liverpool do it really well and Arsenal do it really well. They typically pick a competition on top of the Premier League, whether it's Europe or one of the domestic trophies, and they go all in on those two. And they let the others kind of slip by the wayside, but they don't go all in just on the league. And you see them get those trophies over the line from time to time. So I'd like to see that. I'd like him to get to the semi-final of the FA Cup. I'd love to win that trophy. It's just... Of course. I guess people like you, Mike, you've seen it. I've never seen it. And my relatives who go, they talk about the magic of that competition and winning it. And to me, it would just kind of complete the whole journey I'm going on with Spurs, the European Cup, the FA Cup, seeing both of those. So, yeah.
I mean, it would be incredible, the fact that, Frank, if he goes and wins the Super Cup, we'd have 2 trophies in the space of 4 months. I mean, it would just be a typical Tottenham thing, like London buses, right, Martin? Can that be achieved? I mean,
let's turn it into a happy.
Is that a great first game or a worse first game to have the Super Cup, Martin?
Well, it is going to be PSG reserves.
Okay,
that should help. But also, I'd have preferred to play Inter Milan even before the final, because I thought that we could beat Inter Milan. I don't think we can beat PSG. PSG turn up; they're just better. They are. They're the best team in Europe. They're fantastic, and they deserve to be Champions League winners. They were brilliant last season when it mattered. After Christmas, they were terrifying to look at, to try and play again. I thought they were fantastic. But there you go. Nothing wrong with a decent game to start, is it? Makes it fun.
It's going to be a fascinating journey. Martin, we could talk to you for literally hours. We love having you on this show. We really, really do. Martin, do you want to tell us what you're all doing now? Is it exciting coming up in your way? I know, again, you're across a lot of different things, sport-wise and football-wise. Anything you want to share from your perspective?
I've spent the last few a lot of this week at Queen's. I've got some tennis coming up this summer at Wimbledon, and we'll just see what the summer brings and what next year brings, because you never know. Nothing lasts forever. Everything's in a state of flux. You never know. But what doesn't change is the fun I have in the job.
Absolutely. And listen, you do it so well. And like I say, we always love your opinions on it. We have done over the last 7-8 years. We look forward to a January catch-up where, fingers crossed, we are riding high at the very top of the league, and we are so excited about the players we're going to buy to add to what will be a second trophy or even more of the season. Thank you so much. Jim, thank you so much. Cracking show, right? Unbelievable to have Martin on. Great insight, as always.
Thanks a lot.
Martin.
Martin, you're a star. Make sure you check him out at Oh So Spurs Podcast. Guys, we've been the last word on Spurs. Thank you so much for all your support. Keep liking, keep subscribing. We'll be back with you before you know it. And as always, come on you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs.